Hello! I'm back to talk to you some more about Bob Marshall, Defender of the Wilderness, which was written by Linda Elovitz Marshall and illustrated by me, Jeannie Bowman. Today I'm going to be highlighting this page of the book, which is actually my favorite spread, and it's mainly just because I loved painting the lighting. I really love campfire scenes. There's something really fun about going really, really dark and then having a spot of bright light. And all of these pages, if you haven't watched the other videos, all of these pages were painted in Adobe Fresco, which was my first time painting anything digitally. Usually I use watercolor, so this was a fun process for me to experiment, to see what works, and just to kind of play around with new materials. In the last few videos, I gave you a few facts about Bob Marshall. Today I want to talk about his philosophies and efforts to fight discrimination within the Forest Service. Bob Marshall was a lifelong explorer and lover of wild spaces. He believed that wilderness was important to preserve because of its beauty and also because of how it promised adventure to everybody. He wrote, "There is just one hope of repulsing the tyrannical ambition of civilization to conquer every niche on the whole earth. That hope is the organization of spirited people who will fight for the freedom of wilderness." Bob also strongly believed in and supported civil rights movements. As Linda Elovitz Marshall, the author of Bob Marshall, Defender of the Wilderness, writes, "Being Jewish, he knew from personal experience that many different people suffered from discrimination and prejudice." In 1925, when he started working with the Forest Service, he was assigned to the Northern Rocky Mountain Experiment Station in Missoula, Montana. While there, he took a special interest in the loggers and firefighters working. James Glover wrote in his biography of Bob, "Marshall's interest in these men was typical of his personality, for he was always interested by people whose backgrounds were different than his." While talking to these people, he began to gain a new appreciation for their economic hardships. As Glover writes, he became convinced that the human misery he saw on the Mount Watson fire line was largely the result of an exploitative economic system. He became interested in socialism and liberal philosophies. He joined the Tenant Unemployed League of the District of Columbia, which helped unemployed people find and keep housing. Following in his father's footsteps, Bob became a chairman of the American Civil Liberties Union in the Washington, D.C. chapter. He was even once arrested for participating in a United Front demonstration. Later, he routinely donated to different civil rights, labor, and socialist organizations such as the National Negro Congress, ACLA, the American League for Peace and Democracy, and the Workers' Alliance. Bob returned to the Forest Service in 1937. Bob wanted to build and operate camps that would allow minority groups to enjoy the outdoors for a lower fee and to change agency practices that discriminated against African Americans, Jews, and other minorities. At the time, dude ranches and resorts that operated within the national forests were required to gain special permits from the Forest Service to operate within the wilderness. Bob learned that many of these resorts were discriminating against minorities. In Montana, Arizona, and Wyoming, for instance, there were ranches that advertised that they could not accept people of Jewish faith. In the South, campgrounds that were supposed to be open to everyone were only used by white people, as it was often too dangerous for black families to try to enjoy them. Bob Marshall wanted the forest to adopt a policy that no discrimination would be practiced by the Forest Service or any of its permittees, the ranches, campgrounds, and resorts operating within the Forest Service land. He argued, and in 1938, new policies were issued that prohibited discrimination by Forest Service permittees, mainly the dude ranches, and that resorts that catered to only the wealthy were inappropriate on Forest Service lands. James Glover, who wrote a wilderness original, The Life of Bob Marshall, posits that Bob was likely the first high-level official to seriously fight ethnic discrimination in the Forest Service. Bob loved people as much as he loved the wilderness. He especially loved the people of Wiseman, Alaska. He wrote a book called The Arctic Village, which chronicled his time there. He wrote that Wiseman was the happiest civilization of which I have knowledge. After the book came out, he shared the royalties from it with the people of Wiseman. If you're curious, you can actually find some of his letters detailing his time there in the Forest Service Museum. I love finding and reading these letters, which are full of Bob's sense of humor, and I'm going to link them the link to the letters in the description box below. Bob sadly passed away at age 38, but his efforts to support minority groups did not end with his death. He established 3 trusts in his will, one of which was aimed at safeguarding the advancement for the cause of civil liberties. I hope you found this interesting and that you pick up a copy of Bob Marshall, Defender of the Wilderness by Linda Elevitz Marshall, published by South Dakota Historical Society Press and illustrated by yours truly. It comes out on September 5th, 2023, which is just 2 days away. It's almost time for the book to come out. Hooray! So if you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. Thanks, as always, for taking the time to watch this video.